So, is there anything you guys want to talk about? The growing a goatee?
Yes, I know.
Sure.
I was at a friend's house and they had a started reading it. And first chapter was about education. I was just wondering if you had any, you agree or disagree with this.
With Krishnamurti? You know, every thinker who walks into your life has a specific shelf life and serves some sort of a purpose or a benefit for a while until you grow out of that particular stage, and then time passes, you reflect back and you realize, well, he wasn't really as interesting as I thought him to be. When I first heard of Krishnamurti and read some of his works, he was really interesting for me. So I decided to drop life and go to Ojai. And there was once a bookstore in Berkeley by Mose called Shambhala. So one day I go in there, and I forget the guy's name, but they said, I want all the books, about Krishnamurti, by him, of him. And so I spent all this money. I still have the books. Should I tell you a little bit about his life before we... Yeah. So, I suppose, think because life is complicated, and we use our only tool we really have, the ability to think and reflect and examine, to get ourselves out of difficult situations. Sometimes the situation could be on the outside, sometimes the difficulties could be on the inside. So even though you no longer, for example, see your father, you have memories of all the horrible things he or she, your parents have done to you. So you no longer have to go home and physically see your parents and get all riled up, but the emotions and the memories still haunt you. So you're trying to wrestle with the things that live inside. And I say this because around the mid-1800s, an organization came about. It's called the Theosophical Society. It was founded by two people, Helena P. Blavatsky, a Russian woman, and an American named Alcott. And after having read many of the sacred traditions, they came to realize that every 2,000 years a Messiah is supposed to come, and there is a reason. When society becomes far too corrupt or contaminated, it's kind of like us. When you try and try to get yourself out of something, but you can't, you kind of fall ill, you get depressed. And so they had argued that there are these moments in, I suppose, human cultures where there is no light, and you're desperately looking for a way out of this cave, a flashlight of sorts. And so they read all these literature only to realize that every 2,000 years a Messiah is supposed to come down and visit us and teach us a few things about this and that. So by this time, the person who was, to some extent, the principal of this organization, her name was Annie Besant, and she had a friend whose name was Leadbeater, I think. And so they go around the world trying to find a Messiah. And ultimately it comes down to two people. One English named Christmas Humphreys, the other is Jiddu Krishnamurti. Humphreys is about 15 or 16, Krishnamurti is about 11. And so the person who finds him is Leadbeater, who himself has some, I suppose, sketchy stories about him. Anyways, he's sketchy. It doesn't matter. Let me answer your question this way. You may go out on a date with the noblest of intentions, but you want to understand who this person is. You want to get to know their mind, their heart, their soul, their past. And when you go to the coffee shop, let's just say you're a hetero, and remember, you go in there with really good intentions, and you realize that this person is showing a lot of skin. So the noble intentions come from the part of you that's least fleshy, least human, most noble, I suppose. And what you see across the table from you is a person, who doesn't really support or encourage this other part of you, but brings out this other part of you, which is all of a sudden you're more interested in her body than her past or her mind or her soul or her heart. And so that's what I mean by sketchy. There are parts to all of us that can, submits to various forces that will either attract you to someone's flesh, someone's not so flesh, or maybe a little bit of both. So as he's walking on the shore, he sees this 11-year-old kid coming out, and he sees this aura around him. There is just something very special about this kid. So they take his father to the court, eventually adopt Krishnamurti, and they tell his father that he can never visit. Krishnamurti has a brother, very close to his brother. His brother dies, of course. Krishnamurti is basically raised in a cult. You can't touch his teacup, you can't touch his tennis racket. It's kind of like when you read the Old Testament somewhere where God tells Moses that remove your sandals because this is like holy or sacred grounds. That Krishnamurti is profoundly sacred, and most of the people who enter his space kind of defile that particular space, so they can't be close to him. Around the age, maybe 28, 29, of course, his brother's death had an impact on his psyche, because they kept telling him that we'll do all that we can. We'll talk to the gods to make sure your brother stays alive, is healed, but that doesn't happen. So something about Krishnamurti breaks upon hearing that his brother is dead. But there was another, I suppose, set of emotions and thoughts running in his body, which was, does anybody really have access to truth? And if they do, can anybody guide another to the truth? In other words, does truth have a path, or is it pathless? If truth is so easy to impart, why does Jesus tell us all these ridiculous stories in all the three synoptic gospels? Just tell us what it is. Be done with it. But that's not what he does. And he just tells you story after story after story. And when you get to the Gospel of John, you realize, well, he's really become mute. All he does is just do magical tricks, He has an experience at a certain point. It's called the process. It's also called the Kundalini experience. For those of you who are interested in Kundalini, there is a book that came out in the 1960s by a man named Gopi Krishna, who used to sit and meditate before going to work for the government. He has an experience, he quits his job and devotes his life to this particular element that lives in the human body. So, long story short, Krishnamurti lives in a very privileged environment for most of his life. He has women around him all the time. He's never married. He dies a very painful death. When you read his philosophy of life, you'll find no God in it, no spirituality in it, no soul in it, no afterlife in it. Everything is reduced to the way you think. Let's break down what love is. Let's break down what fear is. Let's break down what thought is. He doesn't believe in teachers. He doesn't believe that anyone should follow anyone. He had mentioned that Mahatma Gandhi is one of the most violent men that the world has ever seen and created. So that's Krishnamurti. His idea of education. Now, one of the things you need to understand about Krishnamurti is the following. Sometimes you knock on a door, just one knock, maybe two knocks, maybe three knocks, and the door opens. And you say, wow, that was easy. It only took about 5 tries and I got in. And so you base your philosophy around that you really don't have to wait at all. Just find the door and knock on it, and the door shall open, and you'll go in and you'll have a good time. And Krishnamurti had this philosophy that if you just pay attention, be aware, that get rid of your past, the any thought, is really related to your past, the way you've been conditioned by your parents, by your own life experiences. The real tyrant isn't Donald Trump or Obama. The real tyrant are your experiences. And to some extent, when you think about it, your relationships fall apart not because of Trump, and certainly not because of capitalism. Your relationships fall apart because you fail to pay attention to the sort of needs you have. Some are raw, some are refined, but the refined parts demand too much responsibility. And because of the element of sloth, of course, you wouldn't use this language. You always go back to what's most comfortable, the unexamined, the unreflective. And so you say, well, my first boyfriend did this, and my second boyfriend did that, my fourth boyfriend did this. And you realize these are the authority figures that live inside you. This is your Bible. These are the rules that you follow. And there is no need for therapy. Just pay attention to the flow of your thoughts. Pay attention to the fact that your memories all of a sudden blossom, come forth, and contaminate what lives in the present. And if you're able to understand how this particular tyrant works, then you can just follow the light that lives inside you. So his path to human salvation was basically pay attention to the way you think about things, pay attention to the authority of the past and how it contaminates you. That if you're a Muslim, and I've had many Muslim students, very young, uneducated in many ways, when I tell them the history of Islam, when I tell them the history of how the Quran came about, usually the second day they drop my class and go away. And it's not because they know anything. It's because of how they have been conditioned by their parents. The many times they've gone to the mosque, listened to the imam or some clergy telling them what religion is, what God is. And so instead of thinking and reflecting, they simply react. And that's what we do most often. So Krishnamurti's form of education, I'm really not familiar. Maybe you read the book on education, I don't really know. His entire philosophy really just rests on some very, very, very simple ideas, which is, again, in fact, I wrote my dissertation on him. Your past governs who you are. If you're able to overthrow the past, you can be free. The problem with Krishnamurti is that most often we have to knock on 1,000 different doors at different stages in our lives. And sometimes some doors open, they happen to be the wrong doors that contaminate us even further. Sometimes the doors never open. And you have to exercise patience. He argues there is no reason to be fearful of anything because fear exists in the mind. He doesn't talk about the viciousness of the social world. He doesn't talk about capitalism. His philosophy is one of passivity. So just sit back, look at the way your mind works as if you're watching a movie, and then pay close attention and figure out what things benefit you, what things harm you, make sure the past doesn't contaminate what you're seeing, all that garbage. Is it helpful? Yeah. But I think there is a stage that you have to kind of outgrow him. He serves a purpose for maybe a year or 2 or 3, where he allows you to become independent to some extent. And then you realize that, yes, you can be your own source or resource for only so long before you run out of nourishment. And at that point, you need someone out there to, you have to always be cautious when people of privilege tell you how things are and what you need to do. Okay? Unless you have a very intimate relationship with, like, a teacher of sorts. Okay? Yesterday in my class, I had a student who had read Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, and he had talked about how wonderful it was for him to read Nietzsche because Nietzsche is about yes to life, But, you look at the life of Friedrich Nietzsche. He becomes a professor at the age of 24. He lectures in the classroom. He sits and writes. Does he have to work? No. Does he have to answer to parents? No. And if you look at, again, his life very, very closely, you realize this is a profoundly wounded man. First, temperamentally, he's a mess. Second, he proposed marriage to 2 people, one on the first date, one on the second date, only to be rejected. And those women were picked up by his best friends. Then he gets really, really sick. And so what he does, he locks himself in a room and he writes. Ideas are beautiful. Ideas really are. It's like the idea of, like, love, idea of relationship, idea of going to school, getting a master's or a PhD. Getting yourself to Yale or Stanford or whatever. They're wonderful. But your life is just lived in books. You have no real life practical experience, And so you read somewhere that Nietzsche says, say yes to life. Well, you get yourself into a crappy relationship and you want to say yes to it, but it's overwhelming. And your entire day is miserable. Your entire night is miserable. In fact, your entire life is miserable. There is no way in hell you should say yes to that particular life. In fact, you should rebel, And so that's one of the problems you ought to have with people who don't really have a life. Krishnamurti didn't have a life. Krishnamurti lived on a stage. He would sit on the stage, close his eyes, and talk for about 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. He had people worship him all the time. He didn't need to get married. He was like Albert Camus. He had women all around him. He was like Jean-Paul Sartre. He was like King David or Solomon. When you have that much power, people follow you and worship you, well, you don't really need to commit. All you have are a bunch of useless ideas that you infect and contaminate people with. You know, I mean, imagine if Jesus was black, lived in America. You think he would preach like turn the other cheek? How many times before you stand up and say, you know, fuck that, let's fight? You know, so what you have is a guy, you know, and most of what people teach really depends on their temperament. You know, Albert Camus is an existentialist simply because he's an introvert. You know, so again, don't take people too seriously, especially Krishnamurti. Remember, he's great. What Krishnamurti himself, I think, doesn't see, he is the outcome of a cultish environment. He had teachers. But there just came a time where he gained his independence and walked away. You know, the truth is, you know, you need to hold your father's hand when you want to learn how to walk. You need your father to hold your bicycle when it's your first time. You want your father to sit on the passenger seat when you're trying to learn how to drive. We need teachers of all sorts. You know, to just people go out there, be your own source and just open your eyes, be mindful, be aware. Well, these are like crafts that you have to learn, find the tools, learn. And then once you become proficient in the art of, say, awareness or mindfulness, then fine, go knock yourself out. Let's also add the fact that in the 1960s, America was a land of vultures. You had all sorts of people coming from Nepal, from India, from Sri Lanka, from Burma, you know, telling people how to live life. It was a hippie era. People had kind of lost their faith in government. We had World War I, we had World War II. You had all these movements, feminist movements, gay movements, black movements, white movements, all these movements. So everything was a mess. And so people were looking for something that could inspire them. Beautiful, fertile environment. So you have Rajneesh coming here from India. The Beatles were very fond of this particular fellow. And he gave birth to this thing called transcendental meditation. Well, you come to my office, I take a look at you, I say, okay, Ariana, listen. Your remedy is not praying. Your remedy is not going on a hike. Your remedy is not a boyfriend. Your remedy is a chant. And I know exactly what you need to chant. That word lives inside you. And I know what that word is because that's my job to figure out what lives inside people. That's your salvation to the kingdom of God, if that's where you want to go. But I'll sell it to you. For 5,000, for 2,000, for this, for that. If you're willing to give me 5,000, I'll give you this word. And it may be in your case like Coca-Cola, where you sit home, you know, for 3, 4, 5 hours each day and you say, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. You know, and all of a sudden becomes a business. You know, no different than Scientology, no different than Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. The point I suppose I'm trying to make, Krishnamurti is just one dish in a buffet of nourishments out there. He's going to attract you for a number of weeks, maybe months, maybe a year or two. Then you realize that you're saturated and you find yourself in the same place that you were when you were 2, and then 4, and then 6, and then 10. Ideas just make you more cunning and more clever, but you remain as stupid as you've always been. Lost, confused. That's our place in the world. You know, Krishnamurti doesn't address any of those things. He just doesn't respect human life. In short, I mean, very much like Jesus, he doesn't respect what human beings go through. He doesn't respect life. He's, I suppose, you could say that he's even less than someone like Siddhartha in Hermann Hesse's novel, where Jesus is walking around and there is a father who's like hugging his kid, kissing his kid, loving his kid. But Jesus can't appreciate that because his own entire focus is the kingdom of God. He doesn't appreciate the fact that another human being, like in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s, can actually enjoy hanging out with his or her son. it's not enough, you know. And there are some truths to the Jesus perspective, and there are some truths and validities to Hermann Hesse's perspective. That I think the man who wins, or the person who wins, is the person who can appreciate both. But for you to appreciate both worlds, you have to have access to both worlds. Have a son where you can go and hang out with him, you know. And then when you grow tired and you realize that, well, that particular stage is gone, you know, go to the back room, turn off the lights, sit, cry, pray, repent. I don't know. Anyone else? Martel.
I was wondering, are you referring that Jesus is Mary the Virgin?
No, I think you have a Martin Luther King Jr., who's very much like Jesus, where he argues that you just have to forgive and you have to exercise compassion, you know. And I suppose that takes a great amount of capacity and courage to be violated in so many different ways. And yet you have the generosity to forgive. There are lots of people whose kids have been killed, and they see the person who committed that particular crime in the court, and the mother or the father ask the judge if they're allowed to go to this killer and hug him and forgive him. I mean, that's something that I probably can't do. I haven't experienced it. You know, that takes a tremendous amount of capacity. Then you have other people like Moses in the court, where they see their child's murderer and they leap across the aisle and they want to strangulate this guy. You know, so you have a coin, and with different sides, different capacities, and different expressions. So you have, let's just say, two social activists. You have Malcolm and you have Martin. Malcolm is like a Moses. I will take your shit for only so long, then I will pick up my arms. And then if you want to, like, you know, shoot me, I will shoot back. It's no different than liberation theology that came out of Chile. It's this wonderful branch that came out of Christianity. And then you have Martin, who says it doesn't matter how many times you transgress, I will continue to forgive you, because in your world, slapping me on the right and the left and the right and the left, that's justified. That's your truth. I know you're ignorant, because if you were educated, you would never do that. And I'm standing and waiting patiently for you to eventually become educated. You know, and some of us function the same way in romantic relationships. If your temperament is one of passivity, what you hope to do every time you come home expecting your companion to have taken out the trash, only to realize the trash is full and hasn't been taken out, what you do, you say, hey, honey, how are you doing? While you're, you know, tying this plastic trash and then taking it out with lots of grunts. And you're not going to tell your companion, see, I told you to take out this damn trash, you didn't. Again, you idiot. That's not what you do. You are very nice, you say hello, you know, the niceties of life. And you just pick up this plastic trash and you just carry it out the door in hopes that your companion will become aware. Awareness will shame him, and his repentance, catching himself, once again having forgotten, he'll probably rise, come to you, grab this plastic bag and dump it to the trash himself. Sometimes that works. Most often it doesn't.
Would you say that Martin stood for that note?
You know, the thing with Martin was that you have Henry David Thoreau sitting somewhere reading Bhagavad Gita. It's a book that came out of Indian tradition. Time passes, then you have Gandhi sitting and reading some of the works of Henry David Thoreau. Time passes, then you have someone like Martin Luther King Jr. sitting back and reading the works of Mahatma Gandhi. And when you look at these few figures, you realize something really interesting. Henry David Thoreau had come to realize when he pays taxes, his money is used to make bullets with which to kill the natives. So he said, I'm not going to pay my taxes to the government. Screw the government. Now, his teacher, Emerson, was paying his taxes, knowing full well that the government uses that money to make bullets to kill the natives. For him, that was okay. Maybe he just didn't mind, wasn't aware. But for Henry David Thoreau, his was a passive activism. I'm not going to give money. And he landed in jail. Then you have someone like Gandhi, who gets kicked out of a train because his skin color was a little different. He was sitting in the wrong section of the train. What does he do? Well, he takes the same approach that Henry David Thoreau took. Henry David Thoreau walked away from society and lived in Walden, which was about 5 minutes walking distance from civilization. In other words, you don't fight to change society. You just remove yourself from society because deep down, perhaps you know that it's just too much. I can't change TikTok. I can't change YouTube. I can't change the government. I can't change people. The best thing I can do is find myself a nice little place in Grass Valley. 5, 10, 15, 20 acres. Just go there. And once I situate my physical body in that particular property, all I see are trees. Not Costco's, not Safeways, not diversity, not inclusion. I am free to just live amongst the woods. Okay, that's the path that Thoreau took. And you realize that Gandhi took the similar approach. He was also, like Thoreau, very, very passive. Even though it is true he became a lawyer to go to South Africa to help the poor, but also make lots of money, in the end he came to realize it doesn't really matter what your education is. It's kind of like this feminist movement, trying to teach us men that when you look at a woman, you should respect her mind and her soul. That she has a mind, she can reflect, she can think. Respect that. That's true, but you need to kind of appreciate the fact that I'm a biological creature. If I look at a woman, yes, I can appreciate the fact that she has a brain. I can also appreciate the fact that she has a beautiful body. The brain is very difficult to get to. The body is very easy to get to. Okay? Maybe through her body I can have access to her heart. But for me, for you to tell me stand back, don't covet, don't lust, just sit and talk, be inspired by the way she thinks about life. Are you kidding? Come on, give me a break. And so the point is, it's a family tree, a lineage. Martin goes to Gandhi, Gandhi goes to Thoreau, Thoreau goes to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, who kind of just gets sad and depressed and becomes very, very passive. And eventually Krishna tells him, listen, there is this thing inside you. In this life, you got to do A, B, C, D, so just do it. Malcolm was born in a different environment. He didn't have the same experiences that Martin did. His temperament was also different. My brother and I are very, 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 very different. My brother is responsible. He is committed. I am not. My interior is more of a hippie, where I can just pack up and go at any time. And it's not because I've been abused. It's not because I've been harassed when I was young. I feel betrayed. No. Some temperaments are just restless, Others are not. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
You say opportunity come across that awareness. I think what?
It's what? So here's the thing. Imagine you and I are in a relationship. Well, let's just say you're single, I'm single. From the longest time in your life, you have looked for a relationship that can create some stability in your life. That you're looking for a pillar, a rock, so you can build your house on this rock. Okay? Let's say you and I all of a sudden meet. Now, that's luck. Okay? Unless you happen to be somewhat spiritual or religious, where you say the hands of God are involved. Leave that aside for a moment. You and I are lucky to cross paths. That's the end of that road. Luck. Then comes you. Can you will yourself to be courageous enough to knock on my door, to ask questions, to give me your phone number, to send me a text, to ask me for a second date? From that point on, it's no longer luck. It's your own will. Now, for your will to come about, you have to overcome your habits. You have to overcome your fears. You have to overcome a hell of a lot of things. And it's like in the, 1960s when an African American dates a white person, okay? And they love so much that they're able to justify their position to their parents, to their friends, to society, to culture, to tradition. That's courage. Where you say, I no longer see, my companion as white or black or blue. I just see love. I love them. They are the foundation of my life. And you realize that you have an entire society, running towards you, trying to demolish you. But minus society, you have your own issues to deal with. I am 60, you are 20. I'm trying to tell you how things are, but you try to tell me how things are. I keep telling you, you're a young fart. Shut your mouth. Just listen. Now, from that point on, luck is no longer involved. Your capacity is involved. How well you're able to tame your emotions are involved. It really depends on your maturity. And if you don't have those things, well, this luck that took place, the door shuts. And then you can go back to your life. It's very much like the movie The Matrix, where he's lucky enough to run into Morpheus. And Morpheus offers him two pills, blue and red. And he says, listen, this is your choice. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Okay? I'm going to give you my number. You can either dial it or you can delete it. It's completely up to you. You wake up in your bed. If you take the blue pill, you can go back to your life and you can think whatever. You take the red pill, it gets a little interesting. Okay? And I think all of us experience luck in a variety of different ways. But going back to Krishnamurti, the past comes in, the fears come in, the doubt comes in. And these are all good, by the way, don't get me wrong. It's good to be fearful, it's good to doubt, because they're there as protective mechanisms. You've been here before, you've been burnt before, you've been broken before, you've been betrayed before, you've been lied to before. So it's good to be fearful. But to have fear paralyze you, that's a different story. Your choices, again, have to do with look, sometimes when I had met my own teacher, it was an interesting time because a few years later I got a job at Caltrans. And when I signed the contract with Caltrans, the pay, 20-year-old fart, was about $78,000. That was a lot of money in the 1980s. It's like a few million these days. Okay. They gave me a cubicle, a computer, and a tape recorder, and I had to punch in data. I look at the cubicle to my right, there's a guy lotionizing himself. I look at the cubicle to my left, there's an old woman who's a chain smoker. And these are like almost dead people. And I say to myself, this is what I want to do? Am I going to become like those people? Now, it was a time I had already met my teacher. I was reading a lot of books. And I said, you know what? Screw it. I'd rather work at the car wash. So I just quit. I didn't even quit. I just didn't show up, you know. So I worked at the car wash. And when my parents said, what are you doing with your life? I said, I'm either going to just read books, you know, or go to school, do philosophy. Philosophy, they said. We are Persian. We don't do philosophy. You know, we become doctors. We become engineers. We don't do philosophy. I said, listen, this is what I'm going to do. Now, you have no idea where that's going to take you, as I didn't know. All I knew was that, you know, I'm just going to do philosophy. But I was in a privileged position that I could always wash cars for the rest of my life. And to this day, we still have the car wash. And sometimes when my mind goes crazy, you know, I say, I'm just going to go to Roseville, stay there for 3, 4, 5 weeks, and go to the car wash every single day. You know, play with the machines and those things. So in making choices, what you do is you take a leap of faith, because the future is uncertain. You're in the dark. You don't have access to what's going to happen like 5 years down the road. It's kind of like this class. You write your essay, but you have no idea what the grade is. You keep coming to class, you keep asking questions, you keep doing your assignments, but you have no idea if you're going to pass or not pass. Okay? But you will continue to take the leap of faith, even though your scores have always been 20 out of 100. You say, you know, when he comes to class, he keeps looking at me. Maybe he likes me. Maybe he's racist. But you take a leap of faith. I mean, there is something about us, you know, we have these like ridiculous antennas, you know, like spidey senses. You just know if someone likes you or someone doesn't. And you say, despite the fact that I haven't turned in any work, and the works that I have turned in, they're like all Fs, I have this feeling, I'm just going to stick around and see what happens. That's a leap of faith. Because you still have a chance to drop the class and take another instead. But that's not what you choose. So part of your decision-making process has a leap of faith. Every romantic relationship you get yourself into, it's a leap of faith. And then little by little, you will have access to the person's history. And then your choices become more and more clear. Do I want to stay? Do I want to leave? And you'll be given plenty of bullet points. You will see a lot of things. And those things will tell you if you should stay or go. Okay? But because of hope, because of fantasies, because of dreams, we continue to stay in these relationships. And then time passes, you realize it was a mistake. But so some of it has to do with, again, a leap of faith. Some has to do with your own understanding and how you process what you see. It's tough. It's just tough. Yeah, tough. Yeah, I know.
I was gonna ask, I guess, I don't know, like, with what you were saying about the Theosophical Society and Krishnamurti, it kind of sounds like what they did was kind of not only like kind of evil, but like also like stupid. Like, I mean, I feel like if someone's going to be a messiah, then you don't need to like go out and look for them and turn them into the messiah. Like, they'll kind of just become the messiah.
No, everybody. Magnus Carlsen is a great chess player, but if it wasn't for the support of his father, if his father was bankrupted a few times and he had to desperately look for work, and chess is a very, very expensive sport because you have to travel. I mean, forget now where most of it is online. I played tennis and I want to be a tennis pro. Now, we didn't have any money, but I had a knack for stealing. You know, and that's what I did. I would go into shops and steal rackets. And because I had become really, really good, my string of preference was gut, which was very, very expensive. And I would only go to shops that would give me a guarantee that this string will last you for about 2 weeks. That's what the warranty is. Just in case it breaks before 2 weeks, we'll replace it for free. Okay. Now, all I think human beings have a seed inside them. No different than the seeds you find at Home Depot. The idea that seeds can just grow, that doesn't make any sense. A seed needs a fertile ground. A seed needs warmth. A seed needs protecting. When you drive down Skyline, there are all these tiny little plants growing, and there is a netting around it to protect it from deer, from birds, from various other animals. Just because you have the potential to be something, it doesn't mean you're going to be. You know, someone needs to nourish it. Someone needs to protect it. Someone needs to train it. Again, your response and your perspective, which is good, it's a Western perspective. And in the Western perspective, it's all about independence, autonomy. I can do it on my own, you know, all those things. Now, the narrative that exists in China, in India, in the Middle East is one of qayyim. Qayyim is, you go to Home Depot, you buy a redwood, 1 gallon, 5 gallon, you dig a hole, you put this thing inside there. And then there is yesterday. The winds were very, very strong. And you know that if the wind hits this newly planted redwood, it's going to uproot it. So what you do is, Home Depot, you buy 2 humongous sticks. You plant one here, you plant one here, and then you tie the tree, one, you know, the trunk, one to this stick, the other to this stick. And so if the wind wants to push the tree that way, this wire or this plastic rubber band will hold it. If the wind wants to push the tree this way, the tree is basically unmoved. Okay? And then what's going to happen is after 5 or 6 or 7 years, you look at this 1 gallon redwood, it's humongous. The roots are gone down. The trunk is huge. Now what you do, you grab yourself a nice scissors or knife or saw, and you get rid of this thick rubber band. And you get rid of the sticks and use them for other things. Right now, you're just a kid. And you live amidst this tornado of advertisement. All advertisements, regardless of what they are, they create emotions you don't really understand. They create fantasies you don't understand. You know, and it's no different than, you know, when you have kids and you make sure they don't all of a sudden accidentally run into porn. So there are these softwares you have to kind of program into your phone, into your TV or whatever to protect your kids. And that's the function of adults or teachers regarding what exactly is you want to do. I mean, Roger Federer, he was a #1 tennis player for many, 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 many years. And one of the nice things about Federer, he's like the Muhammad Ali of tennis. He's really, really smooth. He doesn't express a lot of emotions. He doesn't really get angry maybe once or twice throughout his entire career. He's very soft-spoken, very humble. And still being #1 for a decade, he still has a coach. Why? Because all of us have blind spots. All of us do. Take a companion home. Tell your parents you love this person. And I'm sure your mom will have a thing or two to say. As she has said many times to you, this is the wrong person. Why? Because you assume that you have the capacity to know, to understand, to make the proper choices. Your parents are seasoned, man. They'll spank you. They know you won't listen. You're like the prodigal son. You got to go out there, you know, make a stupid life for yourself and then come back saying, you know, yeah, I was wrong. You were right. That's how all of us are. A coach is always a shortcut. Always. If you want to learn anything in life, you need to find yourself a coach, unless you're a genius, like a Magnus. If you lack that genius gene, but you know that you have potential for something, you need a coach. The easiest way to, you know, tell this to you is learn how to play guitar. You don't even need to have a physical teacher. Go online, there are like piano lessons on there you can learn from. But that's your coach. You know. The Western approach doesn't work. It's far too young. But it's okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Is it better to be loved or feared?
Well, in chapter 18 of The Prince, written by Niccolo Machiavelli, who was exiled into seclusion, He argues that it's much better to be feared. Not hated, but to be feared. When you're hated, you inspire people to revolt and rebel against you. You know, find yourself in a dark alley and then slit your throat. Machiavelli did not really explain the various kinds of fear. Sometimes you fear someone for all the wrong reasons. Sometimes you fear someone for all the right reasons. I fear Elon Musk because he has the power to get rid of my job. Then I can't pay my mortgage. My wife will probably leave me. And my kids will be fatherless. Okay? And because I fear him, I'll save my money and move to Sweden. That's a good fear to have. Sometimes you get into an elevator and there's a guy or a gal standing next to you, tattooed from head to toe. You have no idea who they are. But the images frighten you. The way he looks frightens you. You know. Now that fear could be justified. It could also be part of a bigoted or racist self. We don't really know. And there are sometimes this element of fear, as I did for my teacher, because I had a tremendous amount of love for him, but more importantly, I had a tremendous amount of respect for him, which meant that I was always forcing myself to become something that he wanted me to become. Anything short of that, okay, I would fear that because I'd get reprimanded. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't look at me. In gatherings, he wouldn't ask me questions, those things. So it really depends on what sort of fears you're talking about. And that depends on the relationship. You're a married man, okay? And you should follow what Dustin Hoffman, the actor, had said some years ago about how to make sure your marriage doesn't fall apart. As long as you're scared shitless of your wife, your marriage remains protected. If, on the other hand, you don't care about the marriage, there is no reason to fear.
Curious.
Krishnamurti.
What characterizes the Messiah? And is it different?
Hello, Abhi. How are you? So, let me respond to your question by using the four Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay. You can look at Jesus as a teacher. That teacher has the power to inspire you, to train you, to plant seeds inside you, to protect that seed, help it grow. And because you as a student and the teacher occupy two very, very different platforms, the student is always going to misunderstand the teacher. Okay? But the teacher pays attention to you because he sees certain qualities about you. So in one book, he's considered to be a rabbi. That's basically it. Okay? There is no Son of God, there is no God, there is none of those things. So in another text, what you have is not so much a rabbi, but a Messiah. Now, you can look at Messiah in the Jewish tradition that relates him to King David. And David is an interesting figure in the sense that he's a social and political activist. He doesn't invite you to go to the cave. He's like Malcolm X. Your job is to stand up for the poor, for the needy, and for the oppressed. He's like a Karl Marx. Okay? In another text, the Messiah is someone who has inside him elements of divinity. Okay. Now this means that what you have in a single human being, 3 or 4 or 5 different things. You have a Messiah, okay, who is there to make sure that your physical life changes. And that physical life can only change if he is first a rabbi, that he can teach, and then you apply the teachings. Okay? Imagine for a moment that you have no idea what you want to do with your school. You take a geography class with Mark Rozon, and he inspires you. Okay? Now that inspiration becomes like this kingdom of God that has always lived inside you, the seed. You didn't know it existed, but it came forth through Mark Rozon. He becomes your son of God, a stepping stone towards reaching this divine thing inside you. You have this knack for geography, for astronomy, for philosophy, whatever the case may be. Now, we have like 50 instructors on this campus, but Mark Rozon looks at you and says, only in me can you find God. I am the door, I am the way. And you realize that he becomes the person you worship, not the church, not the Bible. He becomes it. Okay. And so, and it's not a one size fits all. Okay. Some people have the capacity to follow Jesus. Some people have the capacity to follow Martin Luther. Some people have the capacity to follow someone bigger or lesser, like Heidegger, like Plato. It really depends. But there has to be a relationship. In other words, I don't really know. So just replace the word Messiah for a teacher. That's all. You know. And then if you want to know the teacher-student relationship, all you got to do is just read the 4 Gospels, and you got to read between the lines. A teacher is always going to be misunderstood. Always. That's the first gospel, Gospel of Mark. So much so that the family of the disciples, Jesus' family, in chapter 3, they say, oh, my son has gone mad. Let's take him to a therapist, like Sigmund Freud. Figure out what the hell is wrong with this guy. Okay. In the Gospel of Matthew, what you have is teachers are always going to give their teachings to people who look like him. Okay? I'm from Israel, I'm a Jew, I'm only going to give my teachings to the Jew. Then it comes to realize, well, they suck. Now you get to the Gospel of Luke. Now in the Gospel of Luke, you can become more universal. Whoever knocks on my door, I will open it. Whoever sits at my table, I will feed him. Then in the Gospel of John, what you realize is it's all stupid. Talking is stupid. Words are stupid. Because words are going to be interpreted by students. Students don't really have the capacity to interpret anything the proper way. They just need to shut their minds, okay? Shut their mouth and just receive. And just let what they have received to just simmer inside them, cook inside them, okay? You know, it's like you put a chicken in a microwave or something. Not a microwave, but a pot in the oven. Every 10 minutes you lift the lid to figure out if it's cooked. Well, Jesus Christ, every time you lift the lid, all the pressure is going to go away. You know, and that's what the students want to do. They're really rushing into understanding things, but that needs to happen 20 years down the line. In the Gospel of John, what you really realize is that teachers inspire. Teachers are just magical. And it's only through their magic that you get connected to them. They raise the dead, you know. They say ridiculous things like, only through me you can see God or get to God. You know, I am Abraham, I am this, I am that. So, I don't know if I answered your question, but whatever. Yeah.
Well, you said something interesting when answering the question. I don't know, it just made me think, like you said, at some point you outgrow things that you outgrow what you read about or certain philosophers. I'm wondering if it's common for them to ever have like a different perspective later in life, or if most
No.
philosophers just kind of keep the same. That's so interesting to me. I don't know. I think that if your whole job is to think, wouldn't you eventually lift the lid of whatever you're studying?
No, because all houses are built on a foundation. You can move the walls, you can add more bedrooms, you can add a deck, you can fix the backyard. But you're not going to crack the foundation. And you're not going to relocate to a completely different space. That doesn't happen. Look, first of all, your temperament is the first foundation. You can't change that. You can't change that. You're either an introvert or an extrovert. Or if you want to make it a bit more complicated, you're made of 4 things. You could. You're either earth, water, air, or fire. That's not up to you. You can make some modest adjustments. But if your temperament is one of water, you can't envy Lilac because he's made of fire and say, I want to read a lot of books to become like him. That's your house. Accept it. Now, the problem with acceptance is that it's going to take you 20 years. Water is passive. Fire is active. When the two of you get into a relationship, she will shit all over you and you will accept. Now, there may come a time where you will stand up and say, you know what? It's my turn to shit on her. But that's not your temperament. It's an act of revenge that's unnatural to you. And when something is unnatural, and you know when it is, you're going to feel guilty that you've shortchanged yourself. So that's one house. You can't change that. And the other is, why the hell would you want to change your foundation if it's based on wisdom and understanding? Why would you want to do it? First of all, we only have one life. Life is short. Our mental and physical and emotional capacities, we don't have much of it really, okay? And in the course of talking about this stuff, you begin to understand more. And that's one of the nice things about being teachers. Okay. Initially, you just read Plato's allegory of the cave, and as you talk about it after 30 years, you realize, well, there is this, and then there is this, and there is this. And you grow as a result. Okay. And because of your own growth, other people also benefit from it. So initially, when you read Plato's allegory of the cave, you have a 1-bedroom. After 30 years, now you have a mansion. But it still rests on Plato's allegory of the cave. Okay. Now, maybe your question is, well, okay, so you're Jesus and your philosophy is one of turning the other cheek. Why don't you relocate and move into where Moses lives? An eye for an eye. Why not do that? Well, that's not who he is. There is a great amount of wisdom to be found in turning the other cheek. And it's going to take you like 5 lifetimes to really understand the wisdom of that particular philosophy of life. There is also a great amount of wisdom in an eye for an eye philosophy, and it's going to take you 20 years. Albert Camus, an existential, he wouldn't probably categorize himself as that. You know, he's French-Algerian. Algeria is being crapped upon every single day by the French. They're being colonized, they're being demeaned. Okay? And he writes this book, The Rebel. And he says, you know what? No killing is ever justifiable. Never. Never. And you have to sit back and say, okay, how many bombs need to drop on my head? How many people, my own people, do I need to watch, suffer, and die before I pick up a gun? Or should I just continue watching my people die? Because Albert Camus said, well, killing someone is unjust. Have you read what's his name? Joshua in the Old Testament? God tells him, go to this town, kill everyone. Kill everyone? Old people, kids. This town is filled with innocents. And God says, fuck them, kill them all. Why? And I think you have the Old and the New Testament, even though they're just written by people, we just don't know who the hell wrote those books. But people write according to the temperament and the time in which they live. Okay. I think there are times you need to be like a Jesus, and there are times you need to be like a Moses. But that discernment is very, very difficult. When do you rise up and take action? When do you turn the other cheek? But going back to your question, no. I like this kind of philosophy. I'm not going to change my way of thinking and my way of expressing ideas just because a couple of students don't like me. Fuck them. What the hell do I care? First, you make it sound as if it's easy for someone to become Jesus. It's not. Jesus had to make a lot of sacrifices that no one in this class is ever willing to make in 20 lifetimes. He was willing 2,000 years ago to leave his family to find answers to bigger questions in life. Not what my grade is. He wasn't content with just reading the fucking Talmud and just being a parrot. He wanted to be touched by something. And for 18 long years, he was willing to make sacrifices. That's not an easy thing. Forget Jesus, Cristiano Ronaldo. He exercises and practices like 6 hours a day. Who the hell does that? Any good tennis player, 6 hours a day. A great pianist, 5 hours a day. None of us are willing to make those sacrifices. So when you look at Magnus and say, well, you're really great at chess, why don't you play dominoes now? I don't want to play dominoes. I've spent my entire life sacrificing my entire life to become a great chess player. Bart Ehrman, I don't know if you know who he is. He is perhaps the foremost scholar of the New Testament. This man knows both the Old and the New Testament inside and out. He's a beautiful thinker. He believes in God, he believes in Jesus, but he knows things, He knows scriptures and books that you and I haven't even heard of. He has access to these secret vaults held by the Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Catholics. For us, it's just Harry Potter stuff. For him, it's like matter of fact. And it'd be wrong for me to say, hey, Bart, you know so much about Christianity. Man, why not just get to know the world of Islam a little? Why would I want him to do that? As a student of Christianity, myself speaking for me, I like to have Bart. I want to give him huge funding to continue his quest to figure out who Jesus was, to find more books, to go to Egypt, to dig up some texts that give us a different perspective on Jesus. I'm tired of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he has found his niche in life. If you like your house, you're not going to move. You'll paint the walls this and that color. You'll invite different people, but you're not going to move. Anyone else before we go home? Yeah.
What do you think makes a good birthday present?
For who?
Just someone in general. And you can think of maybe context me reasons, especially my dad's birthday today. So I'm thinking about, okay, I was just writing my card just now. What should I get him?
Nothing. You should write him a long essay about how you wasted his time, how you made him grow old, how you frustrated him, how you make him anxious and nervous about your future, how you appreciate the fact that he's patient. That's the best gift. Don't buy him shit. It's a waste of money and waste of time. If you have the courage and the time and the patience and the creativity and the intellectual capacity, and if you're aware and mindful of all the things I just mentioned to you, how to raise kids, how difficult it is to raise kids, how to worry about them, you'll probably read that letter over and over and over again until it dies. Best gift. It just takes a lot of work. That's it? Everything? Okay. Jason?
What was the most fun experience you've ever had in your entire life? Knowing everything you know now, and how would you define fun? Fulfillment.
The moment you begin to think and reflect, fun goes away, because reflecting about anything, you know, if you happen to be in a relationship and it's going well, all of a sudden there is a hiccup and you're forced to stand far removed from the relationship and look in, and then trying to figure out what the hell is going on. That reflection creates a good amount of detachment about you, where you have to sit back, observe, take notes, try to process, understand, and then see what the hell you want to do. So anytime you begin to reflect, you know, you have distanced yourself, detached yourself, remove yourself from life. You know, being a kid in Iran was fun. Being in India was fun. Just not being responsible for anything was fun, you know. But eventually, you know, you kind of get condemned and enslaved by life, and you have to kind of make some choices and think and all that. This class is no fun. You know, hanging out with your friends in the sun, drinking, smoking, that's fun. You know, no responsibilities, no future. You just live in the moment, if that's what you want to call it. So. Anyone else? Everything? Okay. Skylar?
I was kind of thinking about,
You know, Skylar, when I was your age, I had a long beard. Hossein knew why I grew the beard, and I knew why I grew the beard too. I was somewhat attached to my beard. So about 2:33 in the morning after the gathering, he looks at me and he says to me, Amir, I'm going to come to the car wash tomorrow. So, okay, Hussein, I'll wash your car. He says, yeah, I know that, but I need you to shave. I said, I'm sorry? I need you to shave. I said, okay. I'm sorry, your question?
well, actually, I was going to ask about teachers. I was going to ask. Originally, I was thinking how you found that. I mean,
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
oh, sorry. I was going to ask, like, you know, how do you kind of find a teacher? But I kind of, I don't know. It seems like you kind of just.
آب کم جو تشنگی آور به دست تا بجوشد آبد از بالا و پست. I went to Costco the other day and I bought 100 bottles of water. I wasn't thirsty. And they're just sitting in the garage. What the poem says, if you really want to appreciate water and if you really want to find water, first, find a way to become thirsty. And once you become thirsty, then all your questions will revolve around water. All your mental space will be occupied by water. You know, what's the use of looking for a teacher when you have no real questions, when you have no real passion? It's just another kind of entertainment. I mean, that's part of this culture, I understand that. But for you to finding, you know, it's like finding a girlfriend. Well, that's great that you have a girlfriend. You just don't have the maturity to keep the girlfriend, to, you know, protect the girlfriend, to protect the relationship and nourish it in the right way. Finding something is not difficult. You know, you first have to make sure you have the proper need. You know, and that can happen in any way. You know, you can walk into a classroom, you can read a book, you can watch a movie, you can have a friend who has read a book. I mean, it's gossip, but nevertheless, it inspires you. And should that inspiration just blossom as it's nourished and protected, then hopefully there comes a stage where you say, I really need, you know, and that need will kind of guide you. That's the best GPS, you know. Just drink a lot of water. And then you realize at a certain point, you really need to pee. And that need, what it does, you don't really care about what the class is, what the instructor is talking about. The elements of shame and guilt goes away. You just kind of stand up and run to the bathroom and just, you know, pull down your pants and pee. That's what need does. It removes all the social construct and all the ways we're enslaved to it. It just removes everything from you. And you just pursue that need because that's your best GPA. GPS? Yeah, and GPA. So for the 10 years that I was with Hussein, the only need I had was to make sure that he's happy with me. That's the only need that I had. And the only need I had was to be in his house, was to be around him. No one else. You know. And that need, to some extent, I suppose it happened through luck. I went there simply because I wanted my father to be engaged in politics and, I mean, just conversation. You know, then all of a sudden I realized I like the way this man talks about things and thinks about things. And then at a certain point I realized that I just need to be around this person and his ideas. You know. But my life was also situated in a way where I was able to spend a lot of time. I had no money issues, I had no psychological issues, I had no mental issues, I had no girlfriend, I had nothing. So my life was relatively clean, you know. If on the other hand, I was like one of our friends, you know, where your wife is a mess, your kid is a mess, your life is a mess, then yeah, you can find inspiration for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, but then, you know, you go back to a house that really just doesn't want you, a wife that doesn't want you, a kid that doesn't want you, so. Anyways, you guys, next week will be our last. We don't meet the finals week. So, everything? Anything? Okay. All right, you guys. Have a nice day.